Hello guys, been a little while. Today what I want to talk about is the way that your lighting affects the mood of the scene, and we're just going to touch very lightly upon some color theory. So what I have here is a basic cabin out in the woods. I believe the woods is called Forest Superior. It's a poser set, and I've thinned out some of the trees. Word of advice for people making sets like this: please don't group the trees into huge numbers so you can only unclump and make invisible 10 or 20 or 50% of the trees at a time. Let me do each one individually. If you're not using instancing, where the trees don't take up any more memory, in this particular case every tree takes up the full memory of each tree. So if you're not using instancing, there really isn't any excuse to not let me have individual control over which one's invisible and which are not. So what we have here is a cabin in the woods scene. I generally tend to prefer A-frame houses because I've got a thing for them, but this is going to work just as well. So here's the basic scene. We have some woods, we have a Skydome background. In this case it's Easy Dome, but you could just as easily use the one from Poser, and then it has a number of lights in it. So here's the basic scene. I'd call this just a vanilla kind of sunny day, some clouds in the background. But just by changing the lighting, look how we can change the mood. So this is grey lighting, that's very flat lighting. See, there's the very overcast. Then we've got green lighting, like a forest kind of lighting. That kind of makes it feel a bit more mysterious. Then we've got a foggy night, or foggy day rather. Then we have what's known as the blue hour, and probably the favourite for most people is the golden hour. And we're just going to touch on how each of those is made. But first of all, let's go to our scene in Poser. So here's our cabin scene with the woods, and this is just set up ready to render the basic blue sky, some slight clouds kind of day. And what we have, although there are lots of other lights in here, only one is contributing to the scene, and it's this infinite light, which is white, I believe, or just very, very slightly blue. Let's just have a look in here. Okay, so that's good. I made it sky color. Now I know that my regular friend of the channel, whose name escapes me, I'm really sorry, Herobito, will frown at me here for not using the color temperature controls. But to be honest, I just find it easier to input colors, so colors by eye. So in this case, we have a single infinite light, and that's all that's creating light in the scene, and then these other lights are turned off. And the infinite light is colored 239, 239, 255. So that's, if I click on this light color picker and then click up here to enter the values manually, and I can see the RGB values are red and green 239, and then a little bit more blue at 225. That should actually be 255. Let's make that bluer. There you go, 255. So that's a classic blue sky. And when I render that, this is only on optics low or optics fast. What you should see is a scene with, nice bright shadows, some bright lights, some nice strong shadows cast by the trees, some nice life on these leaves here, some nice effects happening there with the light pools. But we also have these dark areas in the front. Now, before I go any further, let me just show you something, because there's one more thing illuminating this scene. So if I choose that infinite light, go to properties and turn it off, if I render that scene now, you may expect it to render black as there's now no lights contributing to the scene. But in actual fact, that sky is being used as a kind of a global illumination, I guess you'd call it. So that sky is actually being used to light the scene as well, but it doesn't cast shadow. So it's a good way. Global illumination is a way of faking the way that real light kind of hits the scene from every angle. When you're doing an indoors scene, it's very easy to light because you just put however many lights you think are natural for that scene, say an overhead light, a lamp, something like that, and then the light bounces off the walls, and it tends to give quite nice lighting. But when you're outside, the sunlight casts parallel rays from so far away that even though they're coming from a single point, it's so far away that the rays appear parallel. And then when they hit the earth, although they do cast shadows, the lighting appears to be coming from every direction at once. And that's what this using this sky as a light actually does. See, it's quite a dark scene without that other light switched on. And what does that is this easy inner here. So this is part of Snarly Gribbly's Easy Dome, which I don't think it really works with the latest version of Poser anymore. But if I go to material, it's basically just a sky dome, a sphere that wraps around the scene, and then you can put a HDRI image on it. So here I'm using these images throughout this. I'm going to be mostly using images from a creator called Orestes, and they're actually created for DAZ Studio, but you can extract the images and use them. Well, not extract them, just point to them. So here, if I just follow the path here, you'll see that they're actually in my runtime, but the runtime of my DAZ library. So I can still use these HDRs that he's created, high dynamic range images, to use them as lights for this scene. So this image here is actually what's creating a global illumination 360-degree light. And then when I switch on my infinite light, number one, that creates the lovely shadows that created this lovely mysterious scene here. Not mysterious, kind of interesting dappled lighting. But these trees are very dark here. You can see, although the light is kind of coming from up here, let's say, what would that be, 2 o'clock and slightly to the front, they're not providing much illumination here. So here's a little trick that you can do. If you have another light, so I've got a second infinite light, and this one is down here somewhere. But if you turn the shadows off, so we don't get this dappling of the second light, what it does is it creates the effect again of a directional global illumination. So kind of like the sun again, but it doesn't cast any shadows. So if I now render that scene, and you'll see it fills in these, and I've turned the brightness down quite a bit so that it doesn't wash out the scene. I don't really want that competing with the sunlight. I just want it to just bring a bit of life to these front edges of these trees, and maybe the grass and stuff here as well. And I'm just rendering it low resolution, low quality. But you see now these trees compared to this image, just a lot more legible, a lot more contrasty. And then if you see the fully rendered version that I did here, this is optics high, and you'll see it's quite a nice scene. But this is about as basic as you can get with this scene. In terms of lighting, you have a direction light, and then you have a fill, and there's a skydome there which you can choose to have on or off. I just think it just kind of fills in the whole scene nicely. But although this is nice and bright and contrasty, which is the quality of kind of nice, bright, sunny day, it doesn't really have much atmosphere to it. So a classic that you might want to do is a golden hour. So what's the golden hour? Well, the golden hour is that hour just before the sun goes under the horizon. So the sun's very low in the sky. So what I've done is I've chosen here a separate HDR image of a sunset, and then I've moved it low enough so that we create this interest in the sky. But also, if I load my scene, Okay, so here's my golden hour scene. As you can see, I've changed my Skydome. Incidentally, let me just show you the Skydome again. So I'm just going to click on this preview here, and here's the Skydome. So all of this stuff is not needed. These are just adjustment levels that Snarly built in so that you can change the colors and the brightness. But really what it is a Skydome. It is a HDR image, and the HDR image plugs into the diffuse, although I'm not quite sure why, because it's turned to 0. But the main thing that it does is it plugs in through all of this stuff into the ambient color. And in this case, I've got the brightness turned up. So actually, I'm going to turn that down. I think that's a hangover from something else I did. So basically, it's a HDR image plugged into the ambient color, and then the ambient value to whatever. And what ambient does is it gives self-illumination to whatever you plug it into. So this could be an LCD screen, it could be a torch, whatever. So this sky is now illuminating the scene. And here's, excuse me, where the other bits and pieces come in that contribute to this. I've got an orange light now. I've changed my blue light to kind of yellow orange to give this a strong color to match this sun. I could possibly move that light back here behind the house, but then it'd bring this whole front into real darkness, and I actually want a little bit of brightness here. But then I've also got 2 more lights. Let me go to auxiliary camera. Oh, I'm already on that. Okay, let's go to main camera then and switch to wireframe. And hopefully, right, so here's the front of the cabin. Lots of plants and noise going on there. I don't know if you can see it. But here at the front of the cabin, I've added 2 lights inside the porch, I think, and 1 inside the house. So then when I go back to my auxiliary camera and the texture shaded preview, you'll see what the light inside the house does is it casts shadows outside. Let's have a look at the finished thing. You'll see here that the house is actually casting light out of these side windows and light out of these windows here. I also changed the transparency of these curtains. They were solid curtains, and I turned the transparency to I think 10%. Let me have a look. Maybe 30%. So we go to the material room, pick up the house. This is a house that was actually designed for DAS again, but I just converted it over. Right, so what am I looking for? I'm looking for curtains. Curtains lower, here we go. So I've just changed the transparency to 10%. So it's 90% opaque, 10% transparent. And that just lets the light shine through a little bit and give a bit of life. Again, if we have a look here, these curtains, which were kind of a browny cream color, now you can see the light inside the room and it softens the edges. And having the porch light just gives this lovely front area that's nice and glowy. So what you'd use this for, the reason I'm kind of doing this tutorial is to tell you how you can use lighting to create mood. So the golden hour is considered to be the warmest, coziest kind of mood that you can give to a scene, followed only by the blue hour. If I go to the blue hour here, the blue hour, the golden hour, as I mentioned earlier, is the hour just before the sun sets. The blue hour is the hour just after it goes below the horizon. And in this particular case, I've turned the porch lights off and left the internal lighting to light the scene, just to give it a bit of coolness. And you'll see I actually prefer the blue hour to the golden hour. I find the golden hour a bit obvious, to be honest. You know, if you're trying to create coziness, you know, it's like having a roaring fire or a Christmas scene. It's just a bit too much. Whereas the blue hour is a little bit more subtle. And if you think about color theory, here's a color wheel. And you'll find that colors that are opposite each other on the color wheel tend to make nice contrast. So here we've got the blue for the blue hour, and then this orange or yellow to create that nice blue contrast here. So we've got the blue sky, and then we've got the warmth here. So it also works well with campfires and things like that. So going back to our scene, what I've done is I've placed a point light here just inside the porch, a point light here just inside the porch but not inside the house, and then another point light right inside the house so that it shines through the windows. And then, as I say, I've changed this background to a golden hour background, and the effect is obvious. Now the next effect that I went with was well, I've already described the blue hour. That doesn't really take much imagination to figure that one out. Just turn off some cameras, change the background to blue. Let's go next with grey lighting. So grey is an overcast scene. I'm just going to load that. I'll be back in a second. Okay, so here's our grey lighting. You can see there's lights inside the house. The porch lights are off. I'll just turn this interior light off to start with. Oops, daisy. Turn that off, turn the render quality down so it renders quickly. Oops, not high, fast. And what I've done is I've done a very, very cloudy, overcast day. And I've also done a white or very grey lighting. So, okay, let me turn that down so that it matches the screen dimensions. So you can see here this cloud. If I go into my Skydome, you'll see that's quite a threatening looking sky, if I can show that. Quite a threatening grey overcast sky. And I could actually turn that down again. I think I set up the first one to be double ambient for the blue hour, and then everything else is too bright as a result. And one more trick I've done here, when you tend to get very overcast days, especially if there's fog or mist, if you've ever been skiing or snowboarding when it's foggy, you'll know that the light is very, very flat. It doesn't, you know, in the normal cloudy day, normal grey day, you might still have a bright point where the sun is behind the clouds. But when the clouds are thick enough to obscure the sun entirely, what you'll do is you'll get very, very flat lighting. And so what I've done here is with my infinite light, I've turned the shadows off. So now we don't really know where the light is coming from. And when I render that, you get this quite grey, quite dreary looking scene. And I can make that. So one of the things about grey overcast lighting is it has the effect of desaturating the colours. Desaturation is, if you think of a postbox red, for example, if you take a gradient from that postbox red to grey, the more grey it becomes, the less saturated or the more desaturated it becomes. And we can use that. Supposing this is a scene where we really want to emphasize how grey and threatening and horrible it is, what we can do here is we can go to render settings, and then we can open PostFX, take the saturation here, and let's turn it down by 50%. And then OK. Oh, let's turn that down. Why did that turn it? Oh, I think I did 0.5 minus 0.5 minus 0.5. Did I get that wrong before? Yeah, it did. Right. And then make sure that I click apply PostFX to render. And now that will be even grayer, even more desaturated. While I'm doing this, I will just mention that as PostFX is something that it does after the render, I don't really know why you have to click apply PostFX. See that render pass where it did the PostFX and took the life out of it. Look, here's the bright sunny day. Here's the grey one, and here's the desaturated one. But if I click PostFX here, and this is one of the nice things that they did, I can actually play with these values in real time and see the effect. So if I slide down here, see that gives it back where it was. In fact, it's too saturated now. Or I could go the other way and take all the saturation out and turn it into black and white. But given this is a layer that occurs after the render, I don't really understand why you have to click the PostFX button in the first place. Why can I not just do the render, and then if I want to apply PostFX, I click a button up here and apply them? It seems like a bit of a strange one to me, but anyway. So just to emphasize the point, the grayness and the lifelessness here is achieved by turning the shadow off the light using a grey overcast HDR image on my Skydome, and in this case I've also desaturated. Okay, now let's go to another image. The ultimate extreme of that, of course, would be a foggy day. Now this is actually quite bright because I don't have the fog turned up particularly thick, and you can also set the depth at which the fog starts. So I could have, say, clear all the way to here, so everything in the foreground really pops, and then the fog comes on really thick after that point. As it happens on this one, I just left it on the defaults. But let's go and load that image. I'll be back with you in a moment. Okay, I'm back. So the thing about fog is that it's an atmospheric effect, and it's not visible in the screen until you render. I'm actually not going to render this because I've already done it, and rendering fog just takes forever and ever. But here's how you add it. So here's my scene. It's basically the bright version again with the blue sky, and I go to material, click add atmosphere. Where's atmosphere? Create atmosphere here, and then I choose the fog. And now if I go to here, you can see that what it does is it creates clouds, plugs them into the volume color, and then adds a volume density and turns volume on. If I render this with this check mark turned off, the fog effect won't be visible. And this density value, the more dense it is, the thicker the fog is. But what I want to show you here, so fog can create mystery, a sense of foreboding, you know, like, oh my goodness, I've come across a house in the fog. If it's nighttime, then it can create a strong sense of threat. Or we could turn the lights on in the fog here, and it can represent a haven, you know. So I mean, imagine if this was snow instead of lush grass, and you had the lights, and it's another way of creating a safe space to go to. So I really like using fog. You know, it's just a nice effect that we or mist, you know. It's just a nice way of creating different kind of vibes in your scene. Okay, let's we'll do this one, green light. Okay, so if you've ever been to a very overcast forest, probably much more overcast than this one, you'll get that kind of feeling where the color of the leaves at the top prevent so much light getting through that what actually happens is the light bounces off the leaves, and the light that reaches the ground is more green. And it creates a feeling a bit like being in a cathedral, if you've ever been in a big cathedral, and there's this kind of awe-inspiring kind of feeling to the area. And in this case, all we just do is we just changed our infinite light and just made it slightly green. And most of the time when you're coloring the lights of your scene, you'll want to go very, very subtle on the amount. I'll give you an example here. So if I were going to do this here, that amount of green is way too strong. See the preview up here? That amount of green is way too strong. I want to get just a smidge of green up here, you know, like maybe 5%, 10%. And you know, less is more when it comes to light tinting. Right, are there any more that I haven't remembered to talk about. So we talked about the blue hour, fog, golden hour. Incidentally, talking about the blue hour again, I think something like 90% of all architecture photographs for selling houses have a blue hour photograph in the portfolio. They're very, very flattering way of depicting buildings, especially if they have a lot of glass frontage at the front. Okay, so for my last image, I'm going to show you how to make this night image. I say show, there really isn't much showing involved. So what we have here is a HDRI image, and then I've taken my infinite light here and I've moved it to the back of the scene by sliding it around here. So infinite night lights have direction but not position. Every other light has a location in 3D space, but infinite lights essentially are considered to be infinitely far away. And so the light beams travel parallel into the scene. So I've moved the light here, which is this grey here, around the light ball, which represents our world, right to the back and low, so that it's roughly on analogous to where this moon is. And I've turned off all of the lights in the house just to give it a bit more mystery. As you can see there, I could have put lights there to denote that people are awake, but I wanted the night time and the moon to be the stars in this scene. Now, obviously for this light, I needed it to represent the moon, but the moon itself is not actually is not actually white like you might think. Let me just show you this website. There's a cool website that I go to look up colors, and it's this one here. Let me just reduce the size of that. So this website, oops, daisy, iColor Palette here, icolorpalette.com. And what you can do is you can just type in, let's say, red roses. I don't know if there is such a thing, but let's have a look. There you go, it's out with roses. So similar colors to roses, and there's a rose color, different shades of rose red. So for the moon, we just did moonlight blue, and this gives us this nice palette. Now, these colors are shown using hex at 16-bit color registers. So hex goes 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then A, B, C, D, E, F. That's the values of the color registers. Unfortunately, I don't think Poser recognizes hex. So what you need to do is find a color of moon that you want, click on it, and it'll appear at the top here. And then there's the RGBA color. I don't know what the A represents. And so the values we're looking for are these three. Oops, these three. 206, 215, 226. And then you just go into your light here. So I select the thing that represents the light, so infinite there to show that I've got the right light. Then I click on this color picker, go over here to enter the colors numerically, and here we are the red, green and blue values, and I just transfer those across, and as you can see there's a shade of blue represented here, and that gives me my moonlight. So nice and easy, but just enough light there with the Skydome and the moon behind, just gives this scene a kind of, it's not scary so much as it's interesting. So, you know, quite a good way of depicting the scene. One of the problems with doing night scenes, especially those of you who might be working with DAS, Poser doesn't do this so much actually. Poser's pretty good, but when the light level drops, the render quality decreases, which that definitely happens in Poser as well. But in DAS, if you're using that, you also get a thing called fireflies, and fireflies are little specks of brightness that the rendering engine generates. They can be a real pain in the butt, and you have to turn the render quality up much higher to compensate for that. But in Poser, to be honest, I can't remember ever having seen a firefly just lower quality. You get noise in Poser, but in DAS you get these fireflies that make the image completely unusable. Just your choice of colors massively affects the mood, and so it's really up to you. You know, you don't just create an atmosphere by the shape of things or the position of things in the scene, but also the lighting can be done. That's here, for example, here's that grey one, and now just by turning the lights on, totally different vibe there, I think. So experiment with your lights. I mean, I think that's really obvious, but hopefully this will give you some more ideas. You take care, guys.